And we are live. Welcome, everybody. I see everyone's trickling in. Instead of beginning right away, I'm just going to wait like 30 seconds for everyone to come into our Zoom session today. I see the numbers going up and up and up. So welcome for another fantastic edition of Decanted here with Haute Living and Wine Access, of course. My name is Devanshi Masrani. I'm with Haute Living, and I will introduce our four panelists who are here with us today and go through their bios briefly so everybody knows who is here to discuss this very exciting Oregon Pinot versus Burgundy panel, a topic that I know a lot of people are very excited about. For everybody that's joining us, please feel free to ask questions and comments in our running Q&A and chat. We will try to get to as many as possible. But without further ado, here we go. So first and foremost, we have Kamal Hachandani. Kamal Hachandani co-founded his highly celebrated luxury platform, Haute Living, over 15 years ago in Miami, Florida, building a network and audience of some of the most affluent and successful business people, philanthropists, entrepreneurs, and celebrities in key US and international markets like New York, Los Angeles, Miami, London, Dubai, Paris, and more. His personal affinity and love of fine wine led to partnerships with some of the most celebrated wineries and spirits houses in the world, such as Dom Perignon, Cristal, Louis XIII, Armand de Bragnac, Perrier-Jouet, and cover features with some of the most noteworthy figures in the fine wine world, including Francis Ford Coppola, Bill Harlan, Marguerite Mondavi, among others. He has been featured in globally renowned publications for his wealth of knowledge, specifically in the celebrity athlete wine space, like in ESPN's The NBA's Secret Wine Society and Le Monde's L'Onologie L'autre terrain de jeu de la NBA in France. And he's facilitated monumental wine experiences like assisting the legendary Kobe Bryant in launching his watch at the Napa Valley Reserve. Taking this one step further, he most recently launched Haute Wine Society under the Haute Living umbrella, a digital platform dedicated to fine wine and spirits featuring exclusive content with like-minded wine aficionados like Carmelo Anthony, Sting, Jimmy Butler, Luis Fonsi, Ludacris, LeBron James, and more. Welcome, Kamal.
Thank you, Devanshi. And thank you, Wine Access, Anthony and Matt.
Next up, Vanessa Conlon. Vanessa was head of sales and marketing for several of Napa's most prestigious estates, including Arietta Wines, Dana Estates, and Realm Cellars. Previously, she was a retail buyer and wine bar wine director in New York. She is president of the board for the Jameson Animal Rescue Ranch, holds the WeSet diploma, and was the recipient of the Nikki Singer Memorial Scholarship from the International Wine Center. Vanessa became the 52nd Master of Wine in the United States in February of this year. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Devanshi, Kamal, and Haute Living for hosting, and of course, Anthony and Matt.
Of course. You'd think I would be able to say that bio like without having to read it anymore, but I messed up still. Anyway, Anthony.
That's perfect.
Anthony and Matt are new here. Well, Matt actually has joined us before, but just to remind everyone, Matt Duncan is a third-generation vintner from Silver Oak and Toomey Cellars, managing wholesale in Northern California. His grandfather, Ray, co-founded Silver Oak in 1972 and Toomey in 1999. Today, Duncan is joined by his dad, sister, and uncle, keeping Silver Oak and Toomey family-owned and operated for nearly 50 years. Welcome back, Matt. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Of course. And last but certainly not least, a new face to our little gang here, Anthony Lynch. Anthony Lynch is an importer of French and Italian wines with Kermit Lynch Wine Merchant, the Berkeley, California-based company founded by his father, Kermit Lynch, in 1972. Raised in both Provence and California, Anthony is passionate about traditionally produced wines from the great terroirs of France and Italy. When he is not overseas tasting, selecting, and blending cuvées for the KLWM portfolio, he can be found promoting his wines throughout the US or writing about them in the company's Berkeley headquarters. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Devanshi. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody.
Of course, it's a pleasure. And in a little twist, I'm going to read a couple of lines about Anthony and Matt, who know each other. So just to hear a little bit about their history together, Anthony and Matt met in elementary school in Berkeley, California, and quickly became close friends. After graduating college, they reconnected through fine wine, each taking a role in his family's business. Today, instead of looking forward to kickball at recess, they get together to uncork wines from their respective family cellars, preparing large meals to match the many bottles and geeking out late into the night. Well, if that doesn't sound like the best story ever growing up together, I don't know what does? So that is awesome. And on that note, I invite both of you to tell us what we are tasting today, beginning with Anthony, since both of you have your wines here that we are also drinking. So Anthony, why don't you introduce your bottle?
Absolutely. So we're both presenting Pinot Noirs. Mine is from Burgundy. It's an old world Pinot Noir. It's from Givry, which is an appellation in the Côte Chalonnaise, which is in sort of southern Burgundy. It's made by François Lump, and it's from a vineyard called La Brûlée, which means the burnt, or something burnt. It is a 2018 vintage, and this is a Premier Cru vineyard, Premier Cru ranked vineyard in the village of Givry.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anthony. And Matt has disappeared on us for a moment, but
sorry about that.
Please, if you could introduce your lovely wine as well, please.
Thank you. So tonight we have, my background's going to screw it up a little bit, but our Toomey 2018 Dundee Hills Pinot Noir. This is actually our first release of a Dundee Hills Pinot Noir. We bought an estate in Dundee in Oregon in the Willamette Valley in 2017, and 2018, the following vintage, we were able to have enough grapes from expiring contracts to produce a wine that represents Dundee, truly one of the special appellations of the Willamette Valley for Pinot Noir. And it's I think it'll be interesting to taste next to La Brûlée, wine with calling out its sun exposure and its burnt qualities, in the old world kind of fashion, because the Prince Hill vineyard that this primarily comes from is a very exposed vineyard and does get a lot of sun itself. So an interesting comparison tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So just before I hand it off to Vanessa to start off our discussion, just for everybody's knowledge who's joining us today, I am in the chat about to add links to the 2 wines that we are tasting, as well as a third wine from Silver Oak that will soon be available. Vanessa, is that correct?
It is available right now on wineaccess.com, and for members, you will receive your email offering about it tomorrow with our full write-up as well. But very excited to have the opportunity to offer the 16 Napa Silver Oak, which is several months earlier than the normal release of February. So lots to be excited about tonight.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So why don't you kick us off, Vanessa? I'd love to start this discussion with you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited about this. And just as a little background about our 2 special guests tonight, Kermit Lynch is definitely a name that I've known ever since I started studying and being interested in wine. One of the things that people often do is you'll taste a wine, you'll think, wow, that's really delicious. Who imports that? And you turn it around, and more often than not, when I taste an import that I'm really impressed with, I turn it around and there's Kermit Lynch Wine Imports. So definitely a very well respected portfolio, and one that I worked with in New York and very proud to be working with still at Wine Access. And then of course, Matt, a dear friend of mine and also Wine Access, and someone that actually bubbled this idea up originally. So I can't take credit for it, but I'm very excited that you did because this is a fascinating discussion. So my first question really is kind of starting at the beginning. Devanshi mentioned that you've been friends since grade school. So, tell me about how you became friends, and then when did you both realize that your families were in the wine business? Matt, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. Anthony and I were, trying to think about, well, do we have a great story for how we first became friends? And like any third grader, third grade story, no, we just, we became friends, and have lots of shenanigans from our childhood that mean a lot to us, but probably wouldn't be very interesting to other people growing up. But the point is that we really reconnected after college, after, we had kind of discovered what our families did, what our dads do in their respective businesses, because it wasn't, I don't have any epic stories of, big wine toasts at 10 years old, sneaking away with Anthony, to go drink wine in the back room. I mean, that's just, that'd be fun, but that's not exactly what it was. So it really came to us later as we reconnected, sort of going, we're stepping into this new world, this new business. We need jobs, of course, because we're out of college. And, it's kind of intimidating. I mean, wine's really, really complicated. There's a lot to know. I mean, Vanessa, that master of wine, my gosh, the amount of work that you had to go through to get that, is remarkable. So for us, I think Anthony and I, we really bonded learning wine together, early in our 20s, and now, to get to be with you guys and so many people around the country, I mean, that's incredible that we've come that far.
So, Anthony, I'm curious to ask you this question. Well, both of you, but let's start with you. So, Devanshi, you mentioned you're both family-owned businesses. So, what was that like going into the family business, and did you feel sort of an extra pressure because of your last name?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that you asked that. I mean, going back to what Matt said about growing up, I don't know about you, Matt, but I never really thought I was going to go into it.
I thought I wouldn't go into it.
What?
I thought I wouldn't go into it.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know what I would do, but I certainly wasn't going to be wine. And as you grow up, you kind of, certain things become more apparent to you. And for me, it was a lot of it was having the opportunity to work a little bit for the family business, just as a summer job during college to get a little work experience. And then realizing what an amazing world the wine world is, where you get to travel, eat really well, drink really well, meet super fascinating people from all over the world. And it kind of just naturally clicked. And I sort of fell into the barrel, so to speak. And here we are. So I wouldn't say there was any sort of pressure. It's kind of a funny comparison if you consider the families that we work with in France and in Italy. A lot of them have been, working the family business from generation to generation. Some of them, I think the longest one is since 1490, 14 or 1512, I think, it's on the label. So that's
wow.
That's a lot of generations.
We got a long way to go.
And we don't really have that culture in the U.S. It's kind of, for better or worse, we sort of think we have our independence and our freedom to do whatever we want. The world's our oyster. So I never really went into it with that mentality that I should follow in my father's footsteps. But I'm definitely not regretting that I've done so.
Yeah. And Matt, you mentioned you didn't think that you were going to follow in the family footsteps. What did you intend originally, and then how did you find your way back?
I don't know. I mean, the intentions of a 16-year-old are highly suspect. What you think you're going to do. Of course, the world's just going to be handed to you. That's the way you see it at 16 usually. But I traveled quite a bit in college and was lucky enough to take classes all over the world, all over the Middle East and Southern Africa. And so I kind of thought I'd become a professor of political science or something like that, and pursued an advanced degree in that, and then more or less realized that it was pretty boring compared to what my family was doing in California, and how complex that was, and really ironically how foreign it was. Even though I had grown up in the Bay Area and in wine country, I didn't understand what we did and what goes into growing grapes, how long it takes to grow really high quality grapes, what it takes to make a bottle of wine. I mean, these are 2018s, the wines we're tasting and discussing tonight. They're very young. I mean, they're, if Anthony and I, probably if we could have released a 2016 to taste tonight, we would have, but that's not exactly the sales cycle. It takes a long time for them to age and really become their best selves, the wines, I mean. Anthony and I are still working on becoming our best selves, but, the point is that it's a really long-term enterprise, winemaking. And so you have to be patient. And young people are not known for their great patience. So it took me a long time to come back to, the family business and be able to take my time and move more slowly with it.
Well, so Matt, your family owns one of the most iconic wineries in Napa Valley. And just as a sidebar, I know I've mentioned this to you before, but we launched a podcast, Wine Access Unfiltered, hosted by Amanda McCrossan, which I'm a frequent guest on. And I joked with Matt that I think people will think that you're a sponsor because, which they're not. If you'd like to be, give me a call. But so many of our guests, associate Napa Valley and Silver Oak. They're just sort of so intertwined. So, you've got this iconic winery, and then Anthony, your father imports some of the most iconic wines of Europe. So I'm curious, and Matt, let's just stick with you to start. But what do you think that you've learned from Anthony? And then Anthony, same question to you about Matt's family business.
Well, I almost feel bad going first because it's really, Anthony to explain what he does and what his job looks like. COVID maybe has given him a little pause, but one of the most remarkable tasks, I think in the wine business, which is to travel Europe, travel Italy and France, and look for new producers. Of course, they have many producers that, Anthony has to know and go taste their new vintages, but to go and really scour the old world for these cool new producers and introduce them to the American market. So for me, what I've learned from Anthony and from the Kermit Lynch book is, just to open my mind up to these different wines, grape varietals that I've never tried before. We have Pinot Noir tonight, side by side, so that's a pretty easy comparison. But Anthony's introduced me to plenty of varietals that we don't grow in the U.S., climates that we don't have in the U.S., we don't produce wine from, and to sort of fill out my understanding of what a bottle of wine can be. And I'm not trying to be too deep or maybe even vague on it, but like Pinot Noir is bigger than just Burgundy. It's bigger than Russian River, it's bigger than Oregon. And so the idea is what is Pinot Noir then, and how can we start to understand just that one grape varietal? Well, together in tasting Pinot from around the world, you start to understand what it is. And Anthony was really, really important in my wine journey and knowledge, just filling all those buckets. What is a great white wine from Burgundy like? What is a great red wine like? What are all the Italian wines like? We still have some work to do there. I think we need some more wine there. But for the kind of for the Silver Oak point you made there, that iconic brand, Silver Oak is often described as many people's epiphany wine. That is the first wine that they taste and it snaps together and they go, wow, that's what really great wine can taste like. Maybe it's with food, maybe it makes the food better, maybe the food makes the wine better, back and forth. And so they have this epiphany, this really important moment. And I think, that kind of knowledge and first connection and decision that you understand something about wine is exactly that really special thing that Kermit Lynch has as a portfolio, which you described in that. So you turn the bottle around, you go, oh, Kermit, well, obviously, because it's, Kermit only has great stuff and the wines are great. And that's what Anthony's job is to go around and make sure that if it's got that Kermit Lynch import label on it, it's because they tasted it and they had that same experience in France or Italy and went, oh, wow, this is really good. We should try and import this. And so that kind of dialogue back and forth, that epiphany moment where you recognize either the Silver Oak label or the Toomey label, or then the Kermit Lynch label. I mean, that interplay has really meant a lot to me, and it's taught me a lot about wine.
Yeah. Anthony, same question to you then.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely what Matt said about gaining a bigger sense of perspective about the wine world. Just to provide a little background. So Matt kind of broke down a little bit what I do. I mean, it's a lot of travel, often grueling. Like sometimes I joke that I'm more of a freeway expert than a wine. A lot of time in the road, but it's visiting a lot of really small producers and trying to seek out the next big thing. In addition to the less exciting tasks of looking at spreadsheets and stuff like that, which a lot of people in the industry can relate to as well. But but that's just to say that my experience is super biased towards the old world and towards Europe. Because actually I grew up in France half of my life until I was about 12 years old, because my family kind of settled there since my dad was going back and forth so frequently. So I have French citizenship, I have friends there, and it's basically it's home to me. And that's the lens through which I learned about wine. So it's such a different approach to the way we think about wine in the US. And they're really great. There's a great angle to look at it. There are great things you can take from both sides of the coin. But it's really thanks to Matt that I've kind of had that other world open up to me. Not only just learning about what the great the best, appellations of California are, or best producers, and what the flavor profiles are and how they differ, but just kind of a different way of thinking about wine. It's based in sort of how the American mentality is, in that it's less tied to tradition than it is in France, when you have, like I said, producers that have been doing the same thing for hundreds of years over and over in the same plot of land. And a wine culture that's so deeply ingrained in like the fabric of society. And then coming to the US, where it's kind of like the Wild West, in a good way. It's totally it's a great like whole new world for me that just opened up, and I've learned so much, and it's given me just an incredible sense of perspective on the wine world in general.
Well, I know Matt's working on those generations and generations, right? Since you just
yeah, you
had
could
a
probably
little
hear him in the other room. My 14-week-old is making a little noise, but
yeah, and for being up since 2:30 a.m., Matt,
yeah.
You're doing great, hanging in.
Yeah, well, I finally get the wine, so it was worth the wait.
Wonderful. So Anthony, actually would like to talk a little bit about the wine that we're tasting. A couple of questions about this. So I believe when we first started the conversation about this event and this tasting, I think you mentioned this is one of the newer producers that you've brought into the portfolio. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So I'd love to hear about that process. How do you find these producers, and then how do you make your ultimate decision as to whether it's a wine that you want to import?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that process has changed significantly since my dad's days in the beginning of his career, when he was driving around with a literal map, a piece of paper, or a Michigan map, going through really tiny, remote villages, pretty much knocking on doors. They didn't have cell phones, they didn't have GPS. And so that aspect of it has changed significantly. Hopefully it's a lot easier. I still get lost quite a bit, but the actual process of learning about these producers and learning that they exist is totally different. So we have the internet now. A lot of you can look up anything. So that helps a lot, just to kind of learn what's out there and get a sense of who the big players are, or the small players, the up and coming players in a given wine region. Trying to pay attention to what's going on locally. But the best way to do that is to be there, of course. And I have the privilege of getting to travel a lot, and go into local restaurants, taste. Oh, who's this? I've never heard of this producer. This must be a new guy or girl who's making who's just popped up on the scene, or just word of mouth. A lot of the time, it'll be a winemaker that we already work with who will say, "There's a great new grower in town. You should check him out." So that process can differ a lot, because there's no rule. It's really just like, I like to say, keeping an open nose when at any time, like just always seeking out, listening to and sniffing in your glass, what's going to be the next interesting thing. Even if you're just at a random, side of the road stop to get a quick bite of lunch before the next tasting, you might end up with something really delicious in your glass. For this producer, that's not how that happened. Actually, Francois Lamp was he's running his family domain. I think he took over in the 90s, and it is a family property, but he kind of took it to the next level. So he replanted all the vineyards and pretty much started over everything from scratch, to really focus on the top vineyard sites in this appellation of Givry. And it's, first of all, it's kind of a lesser known village. It's not. It's only about, I want to say, 30 minutes or so from Meursault, Puligny-Montrachet, all these, or Beaune, within less than an hour from Beaune, and all the great vineyards around there. But Givry and the Côte Chalonnaise in general are kind of off the beaten path, and that's something we've always prided ourselves in, is looking in lesser known places, because they're just, you can find great deals, and wines that are just really interesting because you're not really expecting them as much. But in Francois Lamp's case, I think he was selling his wines in small quantities in various places around the country, and had never really broken through, and that strategy wasn't really working out for him. So he was excited to find sort of somebody who could represent him on a larger scale and I guess make this appellation a little bit better known.
Well, you mentioned it's sort of off the beaten path. This is, $65 on Wine Access. Do you think if this was grown in the Côte de Nuits, this would be more expensive?
No doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, it's simple economics. The cost of land there is off the charts. I think I looked this up recently, and to buy 1 hectare of Grand Cru land in Burgundy, and that's like, I think it's 2.5 acres.
Two and a half. Yeah, it's a good amount of land, but still.
I think it costs 20 million euros, or was it 200? I can't remember, but it's an insane amount of money. So in Givry, the cost of land is a lot more affordable, which means the cost of the bottle can be more accessible to the consumer. And what's really interesting is that this appellation has, geologically speaking, the same soils as you have in the Côte de Beaune. So, I mean, it's all of Burgundy is clay and limestone, but there's sort of the same strata that kind of resurface here. So if that's the key to the great wines of the Côte de Beaune, then we have a resurgence of that here at a significantly lower cost for a Premier Cru site. And on top of that, it's also kind of neat that the style of the wines based on the way he makes them, and also just like the way that the terroir naturally expresses these sites. These wines are really accessible in their youth. So whereas like a Premier Cru Volnay might cost double the price and be something you don't want to touch for 5 years because it's just too shut down or not ready, these wines are just like ready to go, ready for business. So I think that's a really cool attribute about them.
And one more question about this wine. You mentioned the name La Brûlée, which means with burnt, which obviously it's not actually burnt. I'm wondering is it because similarly, let's say in the Northern Rhone, the Côte Rôtie, which is roasted slope, which also the fruit is not roasted, but is it because of the situation, the aspect of the vineyard itself that captures the sunlight?
So it is south facing, or I think southeast. So it does have really good sun exposure, but the actual name is due to the soil, which is this kind of reddish clay. So it kind of looks like the clay has been a little bit roasted, and it kind of it tends to give off. I mean, you be the judge, but kind of like a irony or bloody or note in the wine, which is really, it distinguishes it significantly from his other wines, which don't really have that. So it's pretty interesting.
It's beautiful. And then Matt, I'd love to ask a couple questions also about the Tuami Dundee Hills. So tell us, like, what is it about Dundee Hills AVA that drew your family there, and sort of what do you think is distinct about that appellation in the glass?
That's a really hard question. So we started Tuami. Our first Pinot Noir acquisition was in 1999, the same year we actually started making a little Merlot for Tuami, and that vineyard was in the Russian River. It was near our home in Napa, and it was sort of an easier place for us to explore simply because of geography. We started going up to Oregon to look for new Pinot Noir sites in 2014. And the approach that we took is the same approach that we took with Pinot Noir first in California, same approach we've taken with Silver Oak Cabernet over a number of years, was to explore. The question of how to make a great wine starts first with exploration. You have to be curious about how to do it. You have to be humble to know that you don't have all the answers written out perfectly. There's no straight line to making a truly great wine. You have to learn to adapt. You have to learn how to respond to the place, the season, literally the harvest. And so for us, what we did those first couple of years was buy fruit from every appellation we could. We bought it from Dundee, we bought it from Riverton Ridge, we bought it from Eola Amity. We went all over the Willamette Valley trying to experiment with fruit. And so we did that in 2014, we did that in 2015, we did that in 2016, constantly moving to different vineyards. And the really pivotal moment came for us in 2017 when we learned of a very special property that was going to be for sale called Prince Hill, and this is in Dundee. We had worked with a little fruit in Dundee, one of the warmer sub-appellations, I guess, in the Willamette Valley. So, in a cooler climate in comparison to California in comparison to the Russian River. If you're in one of the warmer parts of the cooler region, well, it's just going to make it easier on you to ripen the fruit. And that was more or less our experience. Again, trying all those different vineyards, all those different appellations, buying fruit, bringing it down to California, making the wines, and then kind of going, well, what did we learn? All right, well, let's go try it again next year, in a different way. So Dundee and Ribbon Ridge, kind of those warmer places in Oregon. And so we kind of settled on like one of those places. That's where we want to be, Dundee or Ribbon Ridge. And, it's just luck and patience that the vineyard Prince Hill, owned and planted by Dick Erath, originally one of the forefathers of Oregon viticulture and really high quality Pinot Noir in the US, was looking to sell his home vineyard. Dick lived there for many, many years, and actually a few years after we bought the vineyard as well. And what really made this site stand out was a couple things. One, Anthony, as you were describing the blood red soils of La Brule, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what Prince Hill looks like too. But it's not, the actual chemical composition is very, very different. It's almost like cakey. It's very powdery soil in Dundee, the Jory soils. And so we found this vineyard, and my dad would tell the story if he was on. It's just my dad and my uncle, with Dick's in his early 80s, sort of walking the vineyard. So you guys think you might be interested? Yeah, well, we're interested. We're here looking at your vineyard, and to go walk around the vineyard and see all these different sites, and then to have Dick turn to my dad and uncle at a certain point and go, so you want to taste the wine? And kind of a little confusion, because we did not know that Dick was making wine. We thought he was selling all the grapes. He had more or less retired, selling his Erath brand, which many of you are probably familiar with, to another company, and had really moved on from that kind of bigger scale agriculture. This was his crown jewel that he was trying to sell, his home. And so they go into the little barn to see that Dick was still making 2 barrels of Prince Hill Pinot, and tasted it. And my dad, tells the story and drinks it. Oh my God, this is really special. Maybe like Anthony's epiphany moment, when you step into a new cellar in France or Italy and you go, oh, I think we can work with this. Yeah, this is some good stuff. So that's a long way of saying we found this really, really special vineyard in Oregon, in Dundee. We're drawn to it because of the climate, the subclimate of Dundee, definitely the exposure of this vineyard, and then the chance to really finally commit ourselves. 2014, 15, 16, we had been experimenting. Then 17, we bought this vineyard. And so we started to make a single vineyard Prince Hill Pinot, but we knew we weren't done. And so what we did with this wine in this 2018 Dundee Hills was buy fruit from 2 of our neighbors, actually. So vineyards just right behind us. So I guess north of us, but a little higher up elevation, called Black Walnut and Meyer vineyards, and to blend in like 10%. This is still predominantly our estate vineyard Prince Hill, but the idea was that if you're trying to experiment, and Anthony was mentioning trying to figure out what the neighbor does, what's new, what's cool, who's doing something really, really well in this region, well, let's buy fruit from a couple of our neighbors. Let's see how they grow it. Let's not over impose ourselves onto how their growing philosophy, and let's just buy it, and we'll see if it blends in and see if it works. The 2018 vintage, just remarkable in Oregon. I mean, I think this is, not a bad first effort for our first Dundee Hills Pinot. We did have to come up against the logistical challenge that we don't have a winery yet in Oregon. We have a vineyard, the Prince Hill Vineyard, 35 acres, but where the heck do you make this wine? We had been bringing the previous fruit down to California, but we couldn't give it the Dundee sub-appellation. So just like Anthony's mentioning, this is a premier cru. His wine, the Lump, is a premier cru. That is regulated. That is a title that you can't just, snap on the bottle. It doesn't work that way. It needs to be legally classified as that. And so for us, if we were going to keep making the wine in California, the Oregon wine in California, we could not legally call it Dundee Hills. So it was time to get serious. It was time to look for another place to make the wine in Oregon. And so this is our first custom crush with Lingua Franca. So a relationship my uncle started, another very famous winery in Oregon that, as far as winemaking ability goes, is absolutely top notch. And so our winemaker in Oregon, Chris Burrow, is able to go there to their cellar with their cellar workers, with their, support in their tanks, and, make this wine up there. In the long term, we will have a winery up there, but this is sort of the interim step where we're still experimenting. We're still trying to figure out, what kind of wine, what story do we want to tell? What kind of wine do we want to make from this vineyard? And this Dundee Hill, I mean, like I said, I think it's pretty good, first attempt to the Dundee Hills.
Absolutely. One more question for you, Matt. So you mentioned a couple other, very famous growing regions in California, like Russian River, et cetera, for Pinot Noir. But often I think Oregon is sort of compared to being the most Burgundian region in the United States. Do you agree with that?
Well, if by Burgundian you mean it has the most French Burgundian winemakers living there making wine, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are, many, many French winemakers from Burgundy that have, well, either changed their lives and live full-time in Oregon now, or commute, crazy thing, imagine that, commuting between Burgundy and Oregon to make wine. So there is a recognition, I think, on a very real level that the places are similar. And if you taste the wines tonight, you might go, oh, that's not as much fruit as I was expecting or would expect from a Russian River or, Pinot from somewhere else in the world. But they're very different in some really meaningful senses. And I think if we sort of say that, okay, the climates are more or less similar, I think we can go pretty far with that as far as, cool and unpredictable rain and really variable crop loads that can produce really different ripening, kind of trajectories. So just, I don't want to get too geeky unless people really have geeky questions, but the idea is like, if you have a crop and you lose half of the crop on that plant, on that vine, the plant is going to change the way in which it ripens that fruit. So that's just kind of a basic reality of growing fruit in Oregon, in Dundee, or in Burgundy, cooler, wetter climate than California. It's not as consistent. That's part of what draws people to it because it's so unpredictable. You have to really accept that you're not in control. But the key ways in which it's different, one are in its just placement on the globe. If you were to go, how far north is Burgundy? It's probably closer to like Seattle. It is not, not south of Portland. I mean, there are some serious latitude differences. So that affects sunlight, that affects total photosynthetic load that the grapes and the appellations are going to see. And over time, over a growing season, that produces a different crop, it produces different quality wine. So that's one important feature. But I think the most important feature, for how different Oregon and Burgundy are, how different Dundee and Givry are the soils. Anthony mentioned a little bit about the soils for the wine tonight, La Brûlée, but the soils in Dundee and really in all of Willamette are kind of stratified. That is, they have two different levels. They have a lower level, which is I think below 400 feet elevation. That is an elevation in which in the Willamette Valley, very, very few vineyards are planted. And the reason is because of a massive geological event called the Missoula floods that happened millions of years ago and brought just a tremendous amount of soil, rich mineral deposits down into the Willamette Valley Basin and basically made everything under 400 feet elevation too rich in soil nutrient to grow grapevines. So, okay, so you have that one part that we don't touch. So we are in part talking about elevation in Oregon and Dundee. And then the second part is what's left above. So what do we grow in those more challenging soils where the grapes are grown in Oregon? And that is really a story kind of more acidic soils. I don't know of a great comparison in the old world of like truly acidic soils that produce a fairly complex chemical reaction that I'm not sure I totally understand myself, but have spent a long time thinking about it in the grapevines that mean Oregon Pinots don't quite have the natural acid that Burgundy Pinots do. There's just a difference there. And my personal theory, I'm not a winemaker, I don't have any training in winemaking, but my working theory is that it has a lot to do with the soil composition and the high acidity pH in the soils there. So you have latitude difference, you have soil difference, but climates, maybe we can give it a wash. And certainly for like interest from the old world, interest in French winemakers, there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in Oregon, and they've committed their lives, to learning it.
Wonderful.
Well,
no, Vanessa, go ahead after you.
I was actually gonna ask you and Kamal, because I know you two are on sort of a Pinot Noir exploration. What you two think of the wine?
It's not an exploration; it's a lifetime sentence. So good luck.
I was actually just about to say I'd say exploration / lifelong journey, but I'm very excited to hear about what Kamal has to say because I know this is particularly interesting for him, and then we have a ton of audience questions as well that I want to address.
So for me, what I found the most impressive is the drinkability of something that's a 2018 straight from opening, because a big thing for me has always been age in wine and, oh, you want this. And really the time is the greatest asset that we have. And you figure, hey, that they aged this in this place for that long or that. And to me, the super surprise was just how quick it, you were able to enjoy it. And in seeing how Wine Access, for how they describe the silkiness in Matt's wine. And, you say that's why you actually taste that. And then when you talk about the soil from Burgundy, and you could taste the minerality and so forth. So, this journey of this Pinot party of seeing both the different sides, you can actually see the distinctive commonalities as well as what makes it so, different from each other. So thank you guys, for this beautiful product.
Yeah, and we're actually getting a ton of questions for you guys. So if you don't mind, I'm going to address a couple of them. And by the way, Matt, you're being encouraged to get geeky. So,
Get geeky. Yeah, well, I think now that I think about it, I think my last answer was pretty geeky.
No, just go for it. Just go for it. First, for Anthony, it's an interesting question. For Kermit Lynch, how have the tariffs on French wines impacted your business and the ability to introduce French wine to the next generation of American wine drinkers?
Yeah, that's a that's a good question.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, I'll try not to get too much into politics, but as you could expect, they've had a bad effect. So for just a little bit of background, if anybody was not aware, there were tariffs tariffs put on French wine imports, including or as well as I think some other luxury products from around Europe due to this now escalating trade war that's based on a dispute between Airbus and Boeing. So it has nothing to do with wine whatsoever, but wine being associated with France was penalized. So the tariffs it's a 25% tariff on it's wines under 14% alcohol that are not sparkling. So champagne's good. And it's only from certain countries. Italy's exempt, but France, I think Spain, Germany, I believe. And so if you think about it, that's under 14% alcohol is pretty much all wines from Burgundy. Maybe not so much in some of the warmer vintages where some of them have gone a little bit over 14, but anything Loire Valley, most of Alsace, Bordeaux, a lot of the time, all these wines are subject to a 25% tariff at the port of entry. So the consequence has been ideally not reflected too much in the price because we've worked with our producers to absorb that cost as much as possible to keep the prices stable. But it obviously is it's an extra burden, especially in a really difficult time for business because we're in the middle of a pandemic and restaurants are shut down. It's a horrible time to be burdened additionally and on top of what's already going on. So it's been rough, but we're collaborating with our producers as much as possible to do whatever we can to not impact the consumer too much. Hopefully these tariffs will be taken off soon, but there's no real way of knowing that. It's kind of it's out of our control as much as we may try to send letters to politicians and argue, lobby. The wine industry's had a really great effort to lobby and hire lawyers and specialists to argue this case, but ultimately that's not really what decides it. It's bigger than that, and these tariffs, we don't really know how long they're going to last. So we're learning to live with them because we don't really have the choice. You might have seen like a slight price increase in certain wines, but we're trying to do as much as we can to avoid that because we want people to be able to appreciate them as much as before.
I felt obligated to ask because we got quite a couple of questions about that come in, but rest assured there are some much more uplifting questions as well. Matt, we have a couple of questions about other wines under the Toomey umbrella. And if you can speak to the differences in Toomey Pinots from Oregon versus California.
That's a really good question. So we actually make now 10 different Pinot Noirs for Toomey. So the idea is that we explore basically the whole West Coast where Pinot Noir is grown. So the furthest north, of course, is Dundee, where our Prince Hill estate is. And then as we move from north to south, we have the Anderson Valley. We make 2 and potentially 3, stay tuned, Pinot Noirs from the Anderson Valley. And last year, we actually bought a new winery for us in Philo, so the northern part of the Anderson Valley. So we have Toomey North. We have a third Toomey winery up there. And then we have our Russian River Estate off West Side Road in Healdsburg. And we make 2 different Russian River Pinots right now, Single Vineyard and the Russian River Appellation Pinot Noir. And then we buy a little fruit further south in the Central Coast from the Santa Lucia Highlands, Gary's Vineyard and a Soberanis Vineyard Pinot. And then all the way south, Bien Nacido in Santa Barbara. So that, I mean, I don't know how far that is. It's got to be 1,000 miles. I mean, it's a huge, huge range to grow Pinot Noir, and it's a huge range for us to experiment in. And it's kind of, I don't know, Anthony maybe has some more perspective on like what it would mean for someone to make Pinot Noir from like, 10 different villages in Burgundy. That sort of thing doesn't really happen unless you're, a really, really big house, making a lot of wine, which we're not. These Pinots are fairly small and limited. But the kind of the difference between them is not supposed to be, for us, for Toomey, difference between the Oregon and the California wines. It's not supposed to be this heavy-handed thing. It's like, oh, well, we use, twice as much oak in California. No, that's not how it is. It's, really site-specific question and site-specific interrogation of what, each vintage, each vineyard needs. So the oak is fairly restrained in the Toomey style. It ranges between 20 and 30% new, which, I don't think is too revolutionary. For California, definitely that's a low percentage. We play with a little whole cluster, which in Burgundy, I think is a little more polarizing of a subject. So whole cluster, you imagine you have a cluster of berries, you have the stem, and you have all the little berries coming off of it. And 9 times out of 10, if you're drinking a wine, it has been removed from, especially a red wine, it's been removed from that cluster. So the stem goes off and the berries go in the tank, and that's what ferments to make the wine. But for Pinot Noir, it's one of the rare varietals where you can keep some of those stems and put them in to the fermenting vat and sort of let the aromatic or kind of the tannin profile that results from using those whole clusters. You can play with that. And so some winemakers, will just use a little bit. Think of it kind of like salt, so just 5%, just a little pinch right on top, just 5% whole cluster. And then others will go up, to 50%, and you taste it and like it's this. It could be bitter or astringent if the stems aren't really ripe, but it could also be just really aromatic and like bordering on effervescent. Like it's not bubbly, but it's really bright, and it's kind of this different thing. So it can be taken these really wide different ways. So for Toomey, we want to play probably a little more with the whole cluster than we do the new oak. So the new oak, again, ranging in the 20 to 30% range, and the whole cluster more in the 30 to 40% range. It's actually 40% on this wine, on the 2018 Dundee, which is pretty high. That was a bold move, but I think it paid off. So there are those two components. The kind of critical one is, especially as we're talking about New World Pinot, is the alcohol. So if we're talking about California, Oregon Pinot, what is the alcohol threshold? Does it match kind of what we see in the old world, like Anthony was mentioning, under 14%, between 13 and 14%. And by and large, we're able to achieve that. There are some times where we go over 14, but we're not looking for a big, juicy Pinot Noir that's dark and extracted and, could be a Syrah. That's not the Toomey style. It's more elegant, hopefully more floral. And we try and capture that from, like I said, 10 different vineyards, 1,000 miles apart. I mean, it's kind of a wild thing to do.
I actually have a really interesting question that just came in for all of you, kind of little bits and pieces for all of you, from Gaurav. As natural wines become more popular with millennials and Gen Xers, Matt and Anthony, as the next generation of legendary wine families, how are you two thinking about this new emerging category? And as a part B, Vanessa, when do you think a direct-to-consumer website like Wine Access getting into the natural wine category? And same question for Kamal, thoughts on this as well, because I know that we started to have discussions about more natural wines and stuff like that. So Anthony, if you could start us off. Yeah,
that's a really good question, and it's a difficult one to attack, but I'll try to have a go at it. It's polarizing. I guess one thing to ask is how do you define natural? Because there's sort of the extremists who really think it's, it has to be nothing added, nothing removed, no sulfur. And these wines can often be, a little bit off, a little bit funky, reduced or whatever. And often they're not, often they're brilliant. And for me, it's not really about how, like, it's more about what's in the glass. And so if you can make a beautifully clean, vibrant, expressive wine with no sulfur, with organic farming, no inoculation, no filtration, then you absolutely should. If it requires a little bit of sulfurate bottling to prevent a bacterial, deviation, like an off flavor, then I'd highly prefer or recommend that a small dose of SO2 is added. We've, if you're familiar with our company's history, my father has, he's sort of one of his crusades has been against filtration of especially red wines, but and he's had the opportunity to do experiments with the same wine, tasting the same wine over multiple vintages, unfiltered and filtered. And he found that most of the time, not all the time, the unfiltered is, more expressive, more textural, has more longevity over the years. But there are exceptions. And sometimes, like a wine that's to be bottled and consumed right away, you might want to filter it a little bit, because otherwise it'll just be cloudy and then it might kind of stink in the bottle. There are all sorts of nuances to these questions that I think are often overlooked when we talk about this, when we have this natural wine debate. Because why would anybody be against sustainable farming and, pure grape juice, pure fermented grape juice? That's obviously the ideal, but the reality is that making great wine is not quite so simple. So it's all about making small sacrifices, or not sacrifices, more like compromises, in order to get the best possible thing in the glass. So it's to each producer to make those decisions. And I think consumers can sort of, take it or leave it, whether they're okay with sulfur dioxide being an additive that would help preserve a wine and, keep it clean and pure over a long time period. Then, but others will sort of dismiss that as it being not natural enough. So ultimately, I would say, and this is the way that we go about selecting our wines, is the truth is in the glass. And we want our wines to be as natural as possible, and pretty much, or the vast majority of them are made via these methods, of non-filtration, no inoculation. But that's not always the case. So yeah, it's a really hard topic to attack, but I think people should focus more about what the wine tastes like and why it tastes like that, more than judging it before, based solely on how it's been made.
Matt, any thoughts on that you want to add?
Yeah, and even a Kermit Lynch story. So first of all, this wine tonight is filtered. It does have a small dose of sulfur for consistency. I mean, that is the name of the game for my family, is that, when you open a bottle of Silver Oak or Toomey, you know what you're getting, that it is consistent in its quality, that there are no obvious defects. And Anthony said it. I mean, there are wonderful, wonderful natural, like hardcore natural wines. There are also a lot of natural wines you're like, oh, that's, sure wish you wouldn't have bottled that. That's a weird wine. And so that's not something we want to step into. But for the environmental ethos that I think is kind of the twin pillar of natural wine, like what did you do to the wine? But then the other part is, well, how did you take care of the land? So that part is really, really important to my family. My sister deserves a lot of credit, and my uncle, our president of the winery, for designing and building what we think is the most energy and water efficient winery in the world. That's our new Silver Oak Alexander Valley Winery in Healdsburg. We have a number of certifications that suggest that it is very efficient, and we're constantly trying to get better and improve that water and energy footprint. I don't have time to go into all that necessarily tonight, but the point is, we care very deeply, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how to become better stewards of the land, without holding ourselves to this separate standard of how do we make consistent wine and consistent bottlings. And the Kermit Lynch story I have about that is, I was once told that my dad or my family is one of the largest private clients of Kermit Lynch wine. We buy a lot of Anthony's stuff, and we love it because the book is just so wonderful. And one of our favorite wines is from the Northern Rhone. Kermit Lynch has just a wonderful book of a really unique single vineyard Syrahs from the Northern Rhone. And we collect them and enjoy them and cellar them and all those wonderful things. And there was an offer 2 years ago for one of these very rare special single vineyard Syrahs from the Northern Rhone that Anthony offered. And the catch was that this bottling had not been sulfured. So you have this really special, exclusive single vineyard Syrah that we're buying, and then you from Kermit Lynch, and then you have the opposite, or not the opposite, excuse me, the same, but it's not been sulfured. And so we sort of asked, well, what's the difference? And, well, it's, he wanted to try it. It's an experiment. The producer just made a bold choice, basically the choice to make a natural wine. And so I think we bought 2 bottles. They were a little more expensive. They were, because it's, I don't know, special, different. And we immediately, within 6 months, we had to open one. We just had to see, was this natural version of this very special Syrah any good? How is it different than the wine that we know and love? And we opened it, and kind of like Anthony said, it's more vibrant, it's expressive, it's delicious, it's wonderful. But here's the real problem. A non-sulfured bottle is its own individual, unique, irreplicable expression. So what that bottle tasted like has nothing to do with what the next bottle might taste like. It has a different dose of all the natural things, all the wonderful natural things in wine, naturally occurring, that over time, if it's not preserved, it could be a totally different wine. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is you can't bet on consistency with natural wine. That's not to say you can't have a great bottle, and Anthony's right, you should judge it on what's in the glass. But if you've bought and collected some really special stuff, and you had a great bottle and it's a natural wine, you just don't know over another decade what that next bottle is going to taste like. It doesn't have that same consistency. Right or wrong, maybe it's a different artistic decision. It's kind of actually interesting to think of it as an artistic decision and not like an environmental decision. But yeah, that's how I think about it, consistency. And so I think it is the right decision for us to sulfur, to filter in the minimal ways we do, so that we turn out a consistent product.
Interesting perspective.
If I can just chime in about that.
Of course.
Yeah. Tell us about that wine. Did I make that whole story up?
I know which one you're talking about, but no. One of my favorite quotes about natural wine is from Marcel Lapierre, who's a Beaujolais producer. He passed away 10 years ago, but he was probably one of the first people to really popularize natural wine unsulfured. So they make a Morgon, so a Beaujolais that is organic grapes. It's not chaptalized, so no sugar added to the must, no filtration, no inoculation, no added sulfur at bottling, no anything. So it's literally fermented grapes from fermented organic grapes. And this, his journey to be able to make that bottle on a consistent basis each vintage took years. He had a lot of vintages that he just had to throw down the drain because something went wrong. There was a chemical or biological process, and the whole tank went bad. So he just had to dump it. And he finally, and this is over years of analyzing the wine and the must under a microscope to literally look at the yeast and the bacteria that are floating around, reproducing or not in the wine. He finally mastered that process, and now his son and daughter carry on that tradition of making this amazing unsulfured wine. But one of the great quotes, somebody once asked him, what advice would you give to young winemakers who are seeking to make wine without sulfur? And he said, first, learn how to make great wine with sulfur. So it's a lot of work. The hygiene has to be, impeccable, precision, and it's just 100 times more work to be able to master that. And even then, you're not 100% sure to have a perfect product, especially with all the shipping and storage, question marks around that, whether it's going to be at the right temperature, different little things like atmospheric pressure or the moons or, whatever. All these little factors the wine is sensitive to all these little factors that wines that are even stabilized with a small dose of sulfur are not as sensitive to.
Interesting. Great to get both of your perspectives. And I'd love to hear also Vanessa and Kamal. We're getting a ton of questions about both of you sort of tasting the wines, comparing them, what you're tasting, any notes, the bouquets. Vanessa, to begin with you.
Sure, absolutely. So I think what I love tasting these wines side by side is they're so beautiful, but so distinct. And they actually both really show a sense of place. And I think when I talk about sort of the old world, new world comparison, which was the sort of the impetus behind this whole panel, was comparing, when we say the new world, it's anything outside of the EU essentially. So not necessarily fair to some of new world producing regions that have been producing wines for centuries as well. But, old world is Europe, and new world, for lack of a better term, is everything else. The things that I notice in the glass are, the new world, so that being the Toomey, has this sort of more like fresh berry fruit to it, a little bit more sort of spherical on the palate in terms of the texture, and the tannins are a little bit more sort of soft and supple. Whereas the Francois Lump, the Givry, it has this sort of more, the shape on the palate has this sort of more structured feel to it in terms of the tannins, a little bit, the acidity feels a little bit brighter, and there's a more sort of savory note incorporated as well. So both really beautiful. I get this classic Pinot Noir note on both of them, and this sort of like beautiful cherry note to it. There's a wonderful kind of sensual rose petal note on the nose of both of them. But I definitely do get this kind of more, a little bit more sort of earthy, savory game, for lack of a better word, on the Lump from the Givry, and sort of this more like, I just went to the farmer's market and have this beautiful fresh basket of mixed berries from the Dundee Hills from the Toomey. Kamal, what are your thoughts?
Well, honestly, you actually expressed it so well. My mind is spinning, like, but I will tell you, for me, it's besides, we're talking about the natural and so forth. To me, wine has become something that helps me on a creativity side. It helps you on different sides. So I feel that the wine you drink, how you feel after you drink the wine, is something that should be addressed. And that's what I've fallen in love with, the Pinots and the Burgundies and the lighter and the wine. So I think both of these wines, we have to congratulate them. The fact that they open up so well, so quickly. You're out to dinner, you're that. It's, the minerality of the Burgundy, the silkiness of, the Toomey. So they are distinct, and everything you said actually really encapsulated what I was feeling as well. So congratulations, because I fell in love with both of them.
Yeah,
deeply.
And I did see a lot of comments in the chat about how they both opened up and are drinking beautifully, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And on that note, a couple of questions came in as well for both of you about the ageability of the wines, ideal times to drink them and whatnot. That's sort of just snowballing off of what Kamal was saying. Anthony, love to hear about Francois Lump.
Yeah, I mean, well, just real quick, what strikes me about both these wines is, like Kamal said, they're so open and expressive right now, which I'm not enough of an expert on Oregon Pinot Noir to say if that's typical, but in Burgundy, that's often not the case. I mean, this is a 2018, it's 2 years old, and it's singing right now. So, and I think that's part of it is the way that it's made. So there's actually, this one's not it's fully destemmed. Whereas the Toomey, I think you said 30 or 40%.
40%, yeah.
And that is a polarizing subject in Burgundy, where it's a hot item of discussion these days. But another thing is, this is a 2018, which is a pretty warm vintage in Burgundy. It's kind of a modern Burgundy vintage, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of them, like 2017, 2019, 2020, to name a few, and probably more after that, given the way our climate's going. But yeah, it's wide open and really expressive, but it has that backbone that Vanessa mentioned. It has a lot of minerality, a lot of tannin. It's actually more tannic than the Toomey, I find, and it's kind of chewy. It's kind of this like gravelly tannin, almost. It's not rustic because it is very polished, but it gives you a little something to chew on, and that with that really bright acidity, they create this kind of this backbone that fruit is gonna sort of hold on to that backbone for years and years. And I think, you can age this pretty much like you would like a Premier Cru from a more esteemed appellation. It just happens to be more accessible right now. I would love to do this exact same panel again in 5 years and then in 10 years, and with the same bottles, and see what we find.
Yeah, we should get the data on the schedule now.
Yes.
For 2025.
Interesting. Matt, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think no, Anthony said it perfectly. The only thing I'd add is just that, maybe a little food, a little dinner. Some folks probably on the East Coast are eating as they watch this, would really change both wines, and probably for the better. Just add a little fat, maybe a little salt, a duck or a lamb or something. I mean, you can't go wrong with that, especially with these Pinots. And for the Toomey, I wonder at 10 years, what will still be in this bottle. I think 5 years is very easily attainable, but we're so new, if you like, to making Pinot of this quality. I mean, maybe it has been a little over a decade that we've really been producing, I think, some wonderful Pinot Noirs. But if you've only been doing it 10 years, to say it's going to last easily 10 years, the wine you're making today, it's like, well, we hope so. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, the early silver oak wines are my granddad's partner, our original winemaker, Justin Meyer, you literally used to write on the label that, maybe you should age these 1972 Cabernets for 5 or 7 years, and then that's it. You have to drink them. And some of those wines, like the 1973 North Coast Silver Oak, that's a delicious wine tonight, almost 50 years later. But we had no way of knowing that. Justin had no way of knowing that. That's purely, experiential, and the magic of wine is when you're surprised. It's like, I really thought 5 years was the limit for this, but it made it 15. How could that be? I don't know, but enjoy it. That last piece that you'll just never understand, because the vintage is gone. The vintage is is history, but it can still give you so much pleasure.
That's lovely. We got a lot of questions about climate change, and particularly, I mean, for both of you, but in addition to that, the fires in particular. Any sort of brief thoughts on that? Because it did come up quite a bit, so I'd love for our viewers to get some insight on the effects of climate change on your wines.
Yeah, Anthony, what are you seeing in Europe? How do producers and growers talk about climate change?
I mean, it's a part of life. They're on the front lines. I mentioned this is a warm vintage for Burgundy, and there have been more and more of those. It's the same in every region. Like the average harvest now is up to a month earlier than it was 20 or 30, 40 years ago. So grapes are ripening a lot faster. The average alcohol levels are much higher. And on top of that, there's a lot more of these chaotic weather events, which, Matt will touch on with the fires, but in Burgundy, especially, they've had a rough last decade. I mean, I think until 2017, which was 2017 and 18 were pretty abundant vintages in terms of yield. But up until then, they had something like, I mean, it's different for every producer and every village, but something like 3 whole harvests over the course of like 7 years. So they're pretty much producing half or less, which is obviously financially a big blow. But it's a big stress on the vines. Now there's been hail, frost. What are there are these things called, these bugs, these little flies, like fruit flies, that in I think it was 2014 were a really big issue, because there was such a warm winter that it didn't kill off this sort of this like pest, and that was a big blow. It lost a lot of fruit was lost. So every year is kind of a new challenge, and these are producers who they have records in their family of every harvest, often going back 100 years. So when they say things are different, they know what they're talking about, because they're monitoring the temperatures, the rainfall, and hailstorms, frost, things that never happened before. Now they're happening every year. So it's a huge challenge, not only for a producer's livelihood, but also just to maintain a style of wine that we're used to from Burgundy. I mean, I think for a vintage like this, it's fantastic because it's plump and full of fruit, and it's rich and delicious. Whereas maybe like 20 years ago in Burgundy, it was a lot harder to ripen. The wines could be a little bit hard, a little bit green, and now that's not an issue anymore. On the other hand, a lot of regions, like for example, the Southern Rhone, for example, where the alcohol levels tend to already be pretty high. Now it's a struggle. Every producer is trying to, like rein in the alcohol so that it doesn't go over the top. So the wines just aren't too rich and too alcoholic. And it's, the best producers are asking themselves a lot of questions about farming, about what varieties to plant, vinification techniques like stems, for example, vinification temperature, harvest date, all these little details that that they can, adjust in order to preserve the quality and the balance of their wines. It's all on the table now. It's a really very pertinent issue these days.
And in Napa, Sonoma, Dundee too. I mean, it's the kind of the inflection point we talk about is 1988, kind of 1990, in that period where we went from a kind of a cooler climate in Napa specifically to a much warmer one since, and we've had wonderful, great vintages in that time. But the point is, it's different, and the point is, which Anthony, hammered home, is you have to change, you have to adapt, you have to evolve how you do what you do. And maybe that means a very different business model. I mean, producing half, imagine your business made half of the money it did and there was nothing you could do about it, because that's just Mother Nature, except for buy more vineyards, but you can't do that because everybody's, battling the same thing you are. It's a huge problem in California, and in the wine country fires of the last 4 years, 17, 18, 19, and 2020. It has the idea of fires coming at harvest and fire season really screwing up harvest has not, I don't think yet, forced a change in the way growers and winemakers think about producing wine. That is, I don't think we're quite there yet, but maybe we will be next year after 4 years in a row. At a place where you go, hey, listen, October is going to be really bad, and maybe part of September is going to be kind of smoky too. So you should really try and pick, all of your stuff in early September. Like, we're not quite there yet, but I think that conversation is on the horizon, where it is probably not an advantageous strategy in 2021 next year to, try and make a really rich, tannic, alcoholic wine that can't be picked until October, after all the heat of the summer. Like, there's a lot of fire risk that you're going to deal with then. For Silver Oak and Toomey, to put a really fine point on it, what the great producers are doing, and what our friends are doing, of course, is not making wine that is not up to the quality of Silver Oak and Toomey. You cannot bottle, something that's smoky and tainted and call it, Silver Oak. That doesn't work. And so our commitment is, of course, to only produce wine that is of that quality and caliber. And luckily, that's what we've been able to do. So our, 2017s and on, even 2020, when the fires, kind of raged around Napa, we had some really good harvests. It's not like, I don't know how to put it. It's not like getting cooties, where somebody, touches you, you're in grade school, and then that's it. Your vintage is ruined. It takes a fair amount of smoke in really close proximity to truly ruin a crop. The smoke that sits above the vineyard at 1,000 feet, for a month, it's not ideal, but you can measure how much smoke bonds with the sugar in the grape and then is released through fermentation in the vat of wine. It's not an abstract question. It's not a, how good is your palate? Do you taste the smoke in this? It's a literal question of how much smoke is dissolved in the wine. And for us, we've been able to do extensive trials, both ourselves independently and at third-party labs, to determine how much smoke is dissolved in the grapes these last few vintages. And we've been really lucky. We don't have serious losses. We do have, real losses. We do have 10 to 15%, of our crop that's kind of like, that's probably not the best expression of that vineyard. And guess what? There's no long debate about whether we need to include it, to be profitable or not. No, it's out. We're not putting something in there that's not the quality. And those are the tough decisions you have to make, as a quality wine producer.
Great insight. Gosh, I feel like, again, Vanessa, we say this all the time. We need a part 2 or something.
We do. We need a follow-up for sure.
So many more questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. But before I offer some closing thoughts, a couple of questions came in. Vanessa, what is your wine glass?
Oh, these are just Riedel Burgundy glasses is what I'm using tonight. Yes.
There you go.
But
well,
these wines would be delicious out of a tumbler as well. So
you were the one who taught me drink out of the glass that you like the most. So
yeah.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. but obviously would love to host you guys again. This was so insightful, so much more to cover, so many questions we didn't get to. I apologize to
we're happy to answer more questions if you email either Oat Living or Wine Access or Anthony or I. We will answer your questions. So jump in, communicate.
Absolutely. I think we just need to do a part 2. Vanessa, what do you think?
I think I'm in for sure. So
okay, we'll talk about it. But
okay.
Matt and Anthony, thank you guys so much for your time. Really fantastic content for all our viewers who are interested in wine, and all of us are on our wine journey. So this education and discussions like this are just so valuable to all of us, myself personally included. So I thank you so much for your time and for being here. And of course, I'll leave it to Vanessa with Wine Access, of course, always the best of the best. This journey has been so much fun learning with you and continuing to explore and broaden our horizons in the wine world. So before we wrap up, I invite Vanessa some commentary, and of course Kamal to close us out.
Thank you, Devanshi, and thank you to you and Kamal and Haute Living for hosting us. And no, I just wanted to say, these types of conversations, I think, are one of the things that I love most about wine. I mean, we can sit here and enjoy a beautiful glass, but once you start digging into the stories and really hearing, the inspiration behind them, and then having a discussion about these two different, very different places in the world, but how much we have in common to talk about is really inspiring. So thank you so much, Anthony and Matt. Speaking on behalf of myself, but also all of us at Wine Access, we're so happy to be, partners with you too, and to continue this wonderful journey of wine together. So thank you.
Thank you, Devanshi, for putting this together as well. And Vanessa, it's always a great honor and pleasure learning with you. And if we could just give everybody's social media for the wine, I know Anthony in Burgundy, they're not that active on social media, but
more and more these days.
So, and I guess Devanshi can also put it into the chat as well, but it was truly educational. And as Devanshi mentioned, that this is a part of the journey that I've actually been on. So even being able to taste these two beauties side by side it's a beautiful experience. So thank you guys. And everyone that has asked these questions, if they can follow them, and find out more about your products and so forth, would be great. So I'm at KAMAL and at Haute Living for Instagram, and I'll hand it over to Devanshi.
I'm actually putting all of our Instagram handles in the chat right now for anyone that's interested, but I do see we are getting some calls for a part 2, so I'm not the only one that we need part 2 going.
Deal. We both have plenty of other wines. We'll do a part 2 for you.
We look forward.
Awesome. Let me just add a couple more, but yeah, you guys are fantastic. Just to echo off what everyone said about, this wine journey and telling the stories behind them. I really personally don't think anyone does it better than Wine Access. So it's so great to bring you guys here and hear directly from the source, what we have going on. Yeah, these wine inserts, we actually use them, which I love that you guys have that.
They're super cool.
Oaks Family Silky Oregon Pinot. They nailed it on this one. Burgundy for Wine Access. And so for everyone asking, we have all the info right here. And we'll
asking about pairings or drinkability or decanting times or anything. When you order a bottle, it comes with this amazing insert that gives you all this info to really maximize your enjoyment and experience of the wine, which is fantastic. On behalf of myself and Haute Living and of course Wine Access, thank you all for being here again. Hope you have a lovely night. Stay safe and we'll chat soon. Cheers.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.